Welcome to Ideas in Action, a television series about ideas and their consequences. I'm Jim Glassman. We're here at the Hoover Institution on the campus of Stanford University to meet with Thomas Sowell, economist and author of 46 books, including most recently, Dismantling America, which delivers a stark warning about the direction the country is headed.
People are saying, Iran may have only a couple of nuclear bombs. That's all they need. If they're willing to die and we're not, then there's nothing short of surrender.
This is Ideas in Action.
Funding for Ideas in Action is provided by Investors Business Daily. Every stock market cycle is led by America's never-ending stream of innovative new companies and inventions. Investors Business Daily helps investors find these new leaders as they emerge. More information is available at investors.com.
Thomas Sowell is an economist, columnist, and author of 46 books. He is a scholar in residence at the Hoover Institution here on the campus of Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. His most recent book is Dismantling America and Other Controversial Essays. Welcome, Thomas Sowell, to Ideas in Action. Your latest book, your 46th, is titled Dismantling America. And in the preface, you write this: "The collapse of a civilization is not just the replacement of rulers or institutions with new rulers and new institutions. It is the destruction of a whole way of life and the painful and sometimes pathetic attempts to begin rebuilding amid the ruins." Is that where America is headed? I believe it is. Our only saving grace is that we are not there yet, and that nothing is inevitable until it happens. Why do you believe that America is headed toward a collapse?
Well, domestically, there are so many things going on that we have lost the sense of the values the country has. And we now have an administration which is very actively trying to change the very way we govern, the very way we live our lives. That's the domestic part. That's sort of the slow poison, as it were. But the faster poison is that Iran is getting nuclear weapons. And people don't seem to understand what that means. The Japanese in 1945, were a lot tougher than we are today. And yet it took only 2 nuclear weapons to get them to surrender. So people are saying, Iran may have only a couple of nuclear bombs. That's all they need. If they're willing to die and we're not, then there's nothing short of surrender.
So what do you think we should do about Iran?
Stop them from getting nuclear weapons.
And that would mean attacking them or acquiescing in an Israeli attack?
Yeah, it's sad that it's a question of acquiescing in an Israeli attack. There have been indications that Saudi Arabia would be quite willing to have Israeli planes fly over there at night and bomb Iran. And then, of course, larger protests with the United Nations in the morning. But the very fact that they have to fly around Iraq, because there are American fighter planes there who might shoot down the Israeli planes. I mean, it really does show where we've come.
A lot of people recognize the threat of Iran, but you're actually one of the few people that I've talked to who really see it as a kind of, the term these days is existential threat to the United States. It really changes our existence.
Oh, absolutely. Going all the way back to the Ayatollah Khomeini, he said that his first loyalty is not to Iran, it's to Allah. And so if we can't deter them with the threat that we'll come in and destroy a whole lot of innocent Iranians. They don't care. I mean, you can't deter suicide bombers.
So deterrence worked. We're here at the Hoover Institution, which is home to a lot of people who were architects of the deterrence policy. Deterrence worked during the Cold War, but you don't think it will work today?
No, because you can't deter suicidal people. You either stop them or you don't stop them.
Do you think the administration is kind of distracted by what's going on the economic side and not paying enough attention to Iran? Or do you think there's something more basic going on?
No, I don't think they ever intended to do anything serious to stop Iran. What they are doing is a lot of charades at the United Nations, which follows a whole years. We've had all kinds of charades at the United Nations and at the League of Nations before that, for the very same purpose of giving the impression that you're doing something when you're not doing a thing.
I want to move back to the domestic situation. We've had a recession, and it appears that it's much more difficult to pull out of the sluggishness of the economy than a lot of people thought. Do you think there's something fundamentally wrong with the American economic system?
No, there's something fundamentally wrong with the policies that are being followed. They're trying to relive the New Deal of the 1930s, and the New Deal of the 1930s didn't work. So, I mean, most people, there's this narrative out there that the reason we had massive unemployment in the 30s was because the market failed, the stock market crashed, and you had all this tremendous unemployment. Now, it so happens that for the 12 months following the stock market crash, we never hit double digits in unemployment. Unemployment peaked at 9% 2 months after the stock market crash and started going down. So the unemployment rate was down to 6.3% when the federal government figured it had to intervene. And that's when the downward movement reversed, and we never saw 6.3% again for the next decade. So, I mean, if you follow the actual month-by-month employment numbers, it's just clear as crystal that the disaster came after federal intervention.
So you think that government intervention in this case and in previous cases, but let's just talk about what's going on right now, has actually made things worse. I mean, it's the reason that unemployment is as high as it is today. It would be lower if government hadn't done anything in 2008.
Yes, well, you can you can look at the numbers. One of the figures, I think, the unemployment figures really understate how much unemployment there is because there are people who simply stop looking. But the figure that I like is the one, what percentage of the adult population have jobs? And that figure has been declining steadily ever since the stimulus began. It's one of the many things where words trump reality. There's no sign that the stimulus has stimulated anything. Businesses have record amounts of money sitting idle. Banks have record amounts of money sitting idle. The public is saving more so than ever before. The velocity of circulation of money is lower than it's been in 50 years. So to me, you can call it a stimulus. If you look at what happens, it's a sedative.
A sedative, I like that. And the sedative, is that the result of the fact that businesses feel uncertainty or they don't want to invest?
Absolutely. I mean, how could you not feel uncertainty when Congress and the president are constantly dreaming up new bright ideas they want to try? You have no idea what the rules of the game are going to be, and when you generate that kind of uncertainty, people sit on their money and wait to see how things sort out.
And yet you do talk about the importance of human capital, right? So in your own case, you went to Howard University on the GI Bill.
Right.
And then you transferred to Harvard. But the GI Bill really was a government program. Do you think that programs like that, which help improve human capital, are a good idea?
Well, it depends on this. Everything is, the devil is in the details.
But okay, let's just say that today we've got a lot of veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. What if there were a GI Bill for them, meaning that they really could? I think the GI Bill paid 100% scholarship, didn't it?
No. Well, the one after World War II was a lot better than the one after the Korean War. So I had to do a lot of scuffling to make it. But
what about the one after World War II? What about giving everybody a full
I would
scholarship?
do that in a heartbeat. I suspect that a lot of the people on the other side would not be happy with all these veterans who have a different view of the world suddenly getting all this education and becoming major players in the years ahead.
Talk about President Obama. Do you think he's a socialist?
No, not technically, I suppose, because socialism usually means the government ownership of the means of production. The pattern he's following is much more like that of the fascists, where the government leaves the means of production in private hands and the politicians tell them what to do. And that's much more politically viable because after the government forces the private industry to do something and it turns out disastrously, you can always haul the people from private industry up before congressional committees, denounce them on television and so forth, leaving out the fact that it was you who forced them to do what they did.
And this is the way you see, for example, the health care reforms that were passed.
Well, I was thinking actually about the financial reforms and particularly the housing collapse. That the people who, Barney Frank in the House, Senator Chris Dodd in the Senate, were the people who pushed for all kinds of mortgage lending standards to be reduced, making mortgage lending enormously more risky than it ever been before. And when all of that collapsed, they then summoned all the leaders of financial institutions up before their committees and spent hours denouncing them and so forth on nationwide television. I mean, they understand that the best defense is a good offense. And so this is great political theater. It has nothing to do with reality.
Well, what about the private sector, though? I mean, you know, it is true, isn't it, that there were lots of kind of risky bets that were being made with a lot of money, which was private money, certainly, but it would have a public effect. There are lots of kind of external effects.
There was some of that. More often, the risk was the lenders. One of the reasons lenders don't care whether you're really a good risk is they sell the mortgage to you, and then they sell it. They make out the mortgage to you, and then they sell it to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and the risk now is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's risk.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about how you see President Obama as a leader, because there were certainly very high hopes, and I think they were broadly shared about him as a leader, and yet, how do you think he's turned out?
Terrible. But those hopes weren't based on anything he'd actually done. I mean, if you look at, I was telling my wife about the irony of Martin Luther King's thing that you should be judged by the content of your character rather than the color of your skin. If he'd been judged by the content of his character, he would never have made it through the primaries.
I wanted to hear your views on immigrants. What do you think about immigration in general in the United States?
Well, I think, first of all, there's no such thing as an immigrant in general. I mean, there are some groups of immigrants who come to this country and add tremendously. There are others who come here and go on welfare. I think one of the sad things is people tend to talk about immigrants in the abstract. And there has never been a time in the history of the country when immigrants from different places were all the same. And so I think one of the things the United States has to be able to do in the long run is control the border, first of all, because if you don't control the border, it is absolutely irrelevant what your policy is, because other people will decide who gets in.
This is a tough public policy question, maybe even a moral question. What do we do about illegal immigrants who are in this country, supposedly 10 million of them, who are already here? Can we change the law and kick them out, or do we give them a path to citizenship, or what do we do, or ignore them, which is what we're doing now?
Well, ignoring is the most politically expedient thing to do. The question is whether or not you want to enforce the law. And if you enforce the law, I think you'll solve 90% of the problem. If you're here illegally and you pay a price for that, fewer people will come, and many of those who are here now may decide that it's time to leave. You don't have to, the silly notion that you have to search out every illegal immigrant. Nobody is even suggesting that.
But do you agree, for example, with what Arizona is doing where...
Yes.
Okay.
They're enforcing the law. And it's ironic that the government has stood idly by while all kinds of cities across the country have publicly announced that they will not obey the law. And they did nothing. And now that Arizona says they're going to enforce the law, they're starting lawsuits against Arizona.
So you don't think, for example, it was proposed by John McCain and President Bush supported this, a kind of a path to citizenship?
No.
Where you say you got...
There's always been a path to citizenship. You just don't break into the country and expect to take that path.
Let me ask you another social issue that's important in California. Gay marriage. I know you don't like labels, but a lot of people consider you a libertarian. So what's wrong with a man and a man, or a woman and a woman getting married?
Well, we didn't allow polygamists to redefine marriage. I don't know why we should allow anybody else to redefine it.
Here in California, for example, through the very, very active referendum process. Do you think that voters should be able to make that determination? In other words, if the voters of California say, we say that marriage is between a man and a woman, that should stand, that this is not something for the courts to intervene on, and vice versa, by the way, if they said man and a man?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't see anything in the Constitution that says otherwise.
Let's talk about philosophy. What about liberalism? We've seen this reform for health care that's come about. It's been passed. You talked earlier about some of these new regulations for finance. I mean, in any sense, is there kind of new breath? Does liberalism is it gaining kind of like a second wind?
Well, I'm not sure that liberalism has changed. I mean, the politics will shift from time to time, but I don't see any difference in liberalism. It wants to impose what the elite thinks on the public.
Now, conversely, for conservatives, you've been critical of the Republican Party in saying that they're not promoting a particular governing philosophy. It's more like, they keep talking about numbers.
The idea seems to be that the way for Republicans to win elections is to water down republicanism and be a little more like Democrats. It amazes me because if you look at the Republicans who succeeded and the ones who failed, I mean, Reagan won 2 consecutive landslides. Newt Gingrich took over the House of Representatives for the first time in 40 years. And then it's when you get the wishy-washes, Bush 41 won his election when he said, read my lips, no new taxes. And he lost when he started talking kinder and gentler.
Do you think that there's any hope for the Republican Party? You say we're entering the most critical election
Yes.
in the history of the United States.
Yes, because if you don't stop Obama, Reid, Pelosi by taking away some of their power in this election, I don't see how you're going to stop them at all. I think they will take us past the point of no return. For example, if let's suppose the Democrats hang on to a current majority in both houses of Congress, I don't doubt and it won't matter that Obama has a approval rating in the 40s. They can legalize enough illegal immigrants between now and the 2012 election that he's in for a second term.
And you worry about illegal immigration for its political effects as well as its economic and social effects. That this would be that illegal immigrants represent a Democratic voting bloc.
Oh yes, yes.
So, could you just elaborate on a little bit when you say point of no return? What does that mean? Does that mean that is this to go back to what we were talking about originally with Iran? Is that part of it?
Iran that's part of it. That's a huge part of it because if we don't retain our independence, then the rest of it is really secondary. But even just domestically, I mean, if this medical thing goes through, and if you look at the other things that he wants along with it, including this notion that no one seems to pay much attention to, he wants to have a federal police force comparable in size to the military. And what is that for? When you think of these various tendencies of people who, czars doing this and czars doing that, people we know nothing about and who don't go through confirmation. I mean, this is really dismantling all the safeguards that were built into the Constitution to stop arbitrary power. And the things that are being done now are an expansion of arbitrary power.
Just to get back to the issue of Republicans, because it's an election between 2 different parties. If you don't have very much faith in what happens when the Republicans govern, then in a sense, are we already past the point of no return? Or do you have hope that something will change within the Republican Party that will make it more, let's say, principled?
Well, some things have already changed, the Tea Party being one. But I think more fundamentally, it was getting clobbered by the Democrats in 2 consecutive elections, which sometimes wakes people up. I think it would have been a bad for the country if the Republicans had won both those elections, because they'd have kept on drifting along the way they were. I mean, Bush, in his first term, I believe he vetoed no spending bills. Eventually, it occurred to him that he might start vetoing these bills instead of just sitting there and going along to get along.
I'd like to know your views on the Tea Party. You mentioned the Tea Party. What do you think of it?
Well, they're very heterogeneous, so I guess it's all hard to say the Tea Party. I mean, there are a lot of different people. But I think the idea that ordinary people, and I gather people who didn't ordinarily take part in politics, for the most part, have gotten aroused and are making themselves known.
And they seem to have gotten themselves aroused over specific economic issues. Obviously, it's a big tent, but they seem to be focusing on spending. Do you think that's a good place to focus?
It's one of the many good places to focus.
So, a lot of people say the big problem is the deficit and the debt, and that if you have, yes, you should cut spending, but what about these tax cuts that expire at the end of the year?
Oh my! It's amazing how many things.
I mean, you've heard this argument before, haven't you? I'm not making this up.
I know you're not. Unfortunately, it's a lot like so many things. It gets down to semantics. When you can't just use the word taxes. There are tax rates and there are tax revenues. Now, when you cut the tax rates, that doesn't cut the tax revenues necessarily. The tax rates can go up and the tax revenues can go down. That has happened. The reverse has happened. You've cut the tax. And in the case of the Bush tax rate cuts, the tax revenues collected by the federal government are higher than they were before. The same thing happened with the Reagan tax cuts in the 1980s and the Kennedy tax cuts in the 1960s. Cutting the tax rate does not mean cutting the tax revenue. Now, if they raise the tax rates, it would not surprise me in the slightest if the federal government gets less revenue than it got before.
Do you think that the Bush tax rate cuts are going to all expire and everybody's going to get higher rates?
The rich supposedly will pay the taxes.
But you think that's what's going to happen?
Yeah. The problem with that is, again, it's semantics. The people they call the rich, I'm sure at least 3/4 of them are nowhere close to being rich. Being rich means having wealth. We're not talking about a tax on wealth. We're talking about a tax on income. And we're talking about a tax on income on people who, for the most part, are making that, have not been making that income all their lives. There are people who, at the end of 20 or 30 years, have worked their way up from the bottom and are now making a couple were making $125,000 a year. They weren't making $125,000 a decade ago, and they won't be making it a decade after. So they're not rich. They've reached their peak, and that's when the government steps in to take it away from them.
So this is really part of what you were saying about point of no return. I mean, if these tax rate cuts are, or some of them anyway, are in effect let expire, not repeal, but they just expire if Congress doesn't do anything, that's going to have a very detrimental effect on the U.S. economy.
It'll have a bad effect. How detrimental, we'll find out.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about stimulus, so-called stimulus package, $787 billion plus a bunch more after that to stimulate the economy. You call it a sedative. There are really two parts to government intervention in the economy after the recession. One was the stimulus, but before that, there were measures to shore up financial institutions, which a lot of people felt if they go under, like AIG or some of the other ones, it would cause a terrible problem globally, and we'd be in a much worse shape than we are today. Do you think it was right for government to act, let's say, as lender of last resort or shorer-upper of institutions?
In the short run. The problem is government policies don't end in the short run.
And there's a history, there's certainly a very clear history of that, where government, when government steps in, it doesn't leave.
No. It's like a Venus flytrap. I mean, it's easy to get in, it's hard to get out. Mm-hmm. And especially when the policy isn't working, politically you cannot say, we made a mistake and we have to change. You just cannot do that unless you want to throw your whole career away. In private life, we have to do that all the time. Anyone looks back through his own life or realizes he did this, it wasn't working, and say, oh my God, I got to stop.
Do you ever feel you made a mistake in anything that you've done in a policy or intellectual sense?
Oh my gosh, I mean, you have a few weeks? I think that anybody my age who looks back at all the mistakes he's made, when he gets halfway through them, he will have spent a year. Of course.
Well, just give me one.
Oh, when I was a Marxist in my 20s.
I thought that's what you were going to say.
Oh, good heavens, yes. Fortunately, I was an empiricist before I was a Marxist. And as I began to see what things led to, and particularly when I became an intern in economics and saw the government from the inside, I mean, that's enough to turn anybody away. And so that was my turning point. That was my road to Damascus.
I'm sorry, but we have to end it there, Dr. Sowell. I really appreciate your coming to Ideas in Action. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And before we go, I want to remind viewers that you can watch Ideas in Action whenever and wherever you want. Just go to our website to watch complete episodes or download podcasts to your MP3 player through the iTunes Store. Wherever you watch, be sure to join us next time. That's it for this episode. For Ideas in Action, I'm Jim Glassman.
For more information, visit us at ideasinactiontv.com. Funding for Ideas in Action is provided by Investors Business Daily. Every stock market cycle is led by America's never-ending stream of innovative new companies and inventions. Investors Business Daily helps investors find these new leaders as they emerge. More information is available at investors.com. This program is a production of Grace Creek Media and the George W. Bush Institute, which are solely responsible for its content.